Welcome back, Defenders. Jake here. We're going to start by following up on the story of Tucker Carlson being fired from Fox News because they've responded to it on Kremlin state TV.
Ну а сейчас печальная новость из страны, которая, если цитировать Лаврова, называет себя самой свободной, самой справедливой в мире, то есть из США. Телеканал Fox News разорвал контракт с одним из самых известных ведущих каналов в истории нашего с вами любимчика, Такера Карлсона. Выгнали Такера не за его непрофессионализм, и уж тем более не из-за провальных рейтингов. Шоу Такера пользовалось огромной популярностью у простых американцев. Уволили его за то, что Такер, пожалуй, единственный американский журналист, который говорил, чего уж там правду.
So Olga is devastated that her favorite American, Tucker Carlson, was fired from his show on Fox News. Same is true for the Kremlin's #1 propagandist. This is Solvyov. This clip is from Russian Media Monitor. I'll put it in a pinned comment down below if you want to watch it for yourself. But it's titled, Russian Propagandists Want Tucker Carlson to Run for President. And here's what Solvyov says. Tucker, I will repeat it once more. Solvyov Live, his show, officially invites you to work on our channel. Tucker, come on board, come on. Let's see, he says. We'll find the money and we'll be able to pay you if Tucker's not already being paid by the Russians. And a quick reminder of who Solvyov is and what he stands for. Here's a clip of him saying he wants to kill everyone.
Я хочу, чтобы был уничтожен квартал в Киеве. Я хочу, чтобы было стерт с лица земли одесская портовая инфраструктура, чтобы были уничтожены Николаевские верфи. Я хочу, чтобы были уничтожены все центры принятия решений на Украине.
So Solvyov and the rest of the crew over at Kremlin State TV, they are in favor of the mass abduction of Ukrainian children. They see no problem with the heads of defenseless Ukrainian prisoners of war being cut off on camera. These people support genocide, and they love Tucker Carlson. They believe Tucker can come to their network and keep saying the exact same stuff he was saying on his show in America, and they wouldn't have a problem with it. Not a good look for Tucker. I hope he undergoes some reflection and questions why people in favor of genocide love him so much. Let's move on. And what the heck are the Chinese up to? President Zelensky and Chinese President Xi hold first talks since launch of full-scale invasion. According to Chinese media, Xi told Zelensky that talks and negotiation were the only way out of the war. One, this is incorrect. Ukraine can militarily retake all of their territory. That's another way out of the war. But President Zelensky is a very skilled diplomat, a very skilled politician, and this is his statement he put out on Twitter. I had a long and meaningful phone call with President Xi. I believe that this call, as well as the appointment of Ukraine's ambassador to China, will give a powerful impetus to the development of our bilateral relations. So what is going on with the Chinese? And I think strategically for the Chinese, Russia's failure to quickly win this war has been a disaster for them. The NATO alliance is now stronger than ever. Western industrialized countries are spending more on defense than they otherwise would have had Russia never attacked a European country. So I'm sure China is furious with Putin, furious with the Russians for being so incompetent. And for anyone in the world that is tired of this war, and they just want it to end, they don't care who wins. They don't care about the Ukrainians. They don't care about the Russians. They just want central bank interest rates to go back down so they can get back to business and making money. So you only have two options. Ukraine agrees to give up some of their territory to the Russians, or Russia gives up on their plans of taking Ukraine's territory. These are the only two ways the war can end this week, basically. And for the last 14 or 15 months, everyone's been telling the Ukrainians, just go to the negotiating table, go to the peace talks, give up your territory, end the war as fast as possible. Putin and the Russians are never going to give up their desire to take your territory. But now that we're 14, 15 months into this war, it does seem pretty apparent that the Ukrainians are willing to fight to the death to protect their land, protect their territory. So for a rationalist like President Xi, who just wants this war to end as fast as possible, between these two men, who seems more likely to budge, more likely to give up on one of these two outcomes? And I think the Chinese eventually are going to turn on the Russians, and they're going to tell them, pull out of Ukraine, give up on this war, let's go back to business as normal. This wasn't worth it. This was a terrible idea. And worst case scenario for the Russians is that China says, hey, you know that territory that used to be ours? We want that back. This is something on Kremlin state TV they don't talk about. But this guy, I don't like him, he's a worm. His name is Mardan. He has his own show, and he said the thing that I didn't think the Russians would ever bring up. So let me read for you what he says. It would be better for our interest if China kept harping on its song about the United Nations and international law. Right now, China's official position is that the territorial sovereignty of all countries should be respected. Russia actually wants China to keep saying this. Because if China starts seriously mentioning some historic rights on the regular basis, then you can imagine that once again we'll have to unfold the 1.5 million man army in the Far East like it was in the 1970s. There is a simple reason for that. Look at the short historic review on how Russia increased its lands in the Amur region. Read how the Far East ended up to be part of the Russian Empire. And here's the problem between Russia and China. So here is a map of the Qing dynasty in the year 1820. This was right before China's century of humiliation, in which Western colonial powers carved up their spheres of influence. So the Germans, the French, the British, the Portuguese, the Japanese, and from the north, the Russians. The Russians invaded China and stole Outer Manchuria. They took this territory from the Qing dynasty. By 1950, China had reclaimed all of their territory from colonial powers, all their territory except Outer Manchuria from the Russians. When the Russians talk about restoring and respecting historical borders, they don't really want to apply this to China's claim to Outer Manchuria. And I don't think this is unrelated, but the last couple years, China's been building hundreds of hardened intercontinental ballistic missile silos in the West. Now, there are 3 nations in the world that have a land-based nuclear deterrent. This is the United States, Russia, and now China. But if Russia and China are military allies, and Russia can provide a land-based nuclear deterrent from the United States, why does China need them? Why does China, in the near term, feel it necessary to be constructing hundreds of these missile silos? And I don't think the United States is ever going to launch a full-scale nuclear attack against China. What I think China wants is a nuclear deterrent from the Russians should they try to retake Outer Manchuria. And here's one of my favorite maps from science fiction. This is George Orwell's 1984. He wrote this in the late 1940s. And in his science fiction dystopian novel, there's 3 superpowers. There's Oceania, which is the Americas, Great Britain, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand. There's Eurasia, where the Russians finished their conquest of Europe. The Red Army kept marching until they took everything. And then there's the third superpower, East Asia. In Orwell's book, these three superpowers engage in a perpetual war. And the only way to keep the war going forever is to constantly shift alliances. So perhaps Oceania and Eurasia are allied against East Asia until East Asia gets too weak, and then the alliances flip. Oceania will then ally with East Asia against Eurasia to stop this power from getting too big. So where I'm going with this is if Russia continues to decline, if their military continues to weaken, I don't think China will hesitate to go into outer Manchuria and reclaim this territory. And they want hundreds of hardened missile silos as a deterrent from the Russians. Sure, Russia might nuke a Chinese city, kill 1 million of their citizens. I don't think President Xi really cares. He's got a population of 1.3 billion people. China would not hesitate to retaliate with their own nuclear forces. I'm being serious. I think the most likely scenario leading to nuclear war in the next 5 years is not the United States or NATO going to nuclear war with someone. It's between two fascist dictators like Putin and President Xi. This is pretty dark stuff. Let's go on Google Earth and just look at this border. This white line is the border between China and Russia. I've talked about this in previous videos. There's a million good reasons why China wants outer Manchuria back. But the primary one has to be access to the Pacific Ocean. The way that China's border stands now, they can only access the Pacific Ocean by going through the first island chain. This is Japan, Okinawa, South Korea, Taiwan, and the Philippines. All strategic allies of the United States. But if they got the Pacific coastline back from outer Manchuria, if they got the Sakhalin Islands, then they could sail in and out of the Pacific Ocean more easily, evading U.S. aircraft carriers. In addition, the Sakhalin Islands have untapped oil and gas reserves. Russia's too slow and incompetent to tap these resources. I also just want to zoom in on the map here and show you the stark difference between the Chinese side of the border. Every square inch of land is developed and being cultivated, used to increase China's GDP. But when you cross the border into Russia, this is the exact same climate, exact same topography. It's barely being used at all. Russia cannot find citizens willing to move out here and live on the Chinese border. So I'm sure China every day just looks at this and says, well, let's just wait for Russia to get a little bit weaker. Let's now check in on the front lines, and the city of Bakhmut continues to hold, sort of, not really. And what I believe is happening here is that Ukraine is slowly pulling out of the city. Maybe every 48 hours they back up one city block, leaving surprises for the Russians as the Russians move into these buildings. And I want to highlight the importance of this decision by the Ukrainian forces to fight in the city and hold on to parts of the city as long as possible. If we go back in time 10 months, the Russians were like right here, just outside of the city of Bakhmut. And even 4 months ago, when the Russians were coming from the north, coming from the south, and coming from the east, Ukraine chose to remain in the city and hold on to as much as they could, as long as possible, in order to slow down the Russians' advance in the Donbass region. If the Ukrainian forces 5 or 6 months ago had completely pulled out of the city, then more than likely the Russian military would have continued to gobble up farm fields, and they would have got within artillery range of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. So the decision to hold on to as much of Bakhmut as long as possible spared the cities of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk for the last 4 or 5 months. I really do believe that. So the sacrifices that Ukrainian defenders have made, holding on to what they could in this city as long as possible, it is going to make a huge difference once Ukraine launches their spring counteroffensive. And for an update on the Zero Line, we've got another short clip from Roman.
Hey, voices for Ukraine. So this is how snipers group working. We're not sitting somewhere deep in our position, but we are on zero line. So our last defender is there, and we're so close to the enemies. With my sniper group, getting ready to do some dangerous mission. Wish us good luck, guys. See you later.
So Roman just got back from 2 or 3 weeks personal leave. He spent time with family and friends in Kyiv, and he does look refreshed and ready to go fight some orcs. And here's some good news. According to the New York Times, nearly all of the combat vehicles Ukraine's Western allies have promised have been delivered to Kyiv in time for their spring counteroffensive. I think I saw a quote saying 1,800 armored vehicles have been delivered in the last 4 months. So over 98% of the combat vehicles are already there, said General Kavali, who is the top commander of U.S. forces in Europe. This was according to testimony before the House Armed Services Committee. So they've got the material, they've got the training, they're ready to go. They're really just waiting on the weather, and it keeps raining in Ukraine. Yeah, that doesn't look like great weather for launching a counterattack. Okay, this next story is insane. Gazprom's private military company mercenaries complain that Wagner threatened reprisals against them. Although they are meant to be on the same side, Russian private mercenary groups appear to be falling out on quite an epic scale. So apparently, Russia's energy giant Gazprom has a private military group, because of course, and they've deployed them to the front lines in Ukraine. Wow. So apparently they weren't being treated very well by the Wagner group, probably not being treated well by the regular Russian forces either. So they decided to film this video directly appealing to Vladimir Putin for help. So let me read for you a little bit of what these idiots have to say. Comrade Commander-in-Chief, today on the 20th of April, appealing to you is the personnel of the volunteer battalion Patak. Patak is the name of their group. It means stream in Russian, which was formed from the international security of Gazprom. Leadership of Gazprom assured us that we would be signing contracts with the Ministry of Defense. That was a lie. But the personnel of Patak was forced to sign a combat task contract with 00 Reduct. And after entering the Special Military Operations Zone on the 3rd of April, Wagner PMC abandoned positions at the contact line as the leadership of Patak took positions under its command. On the 17th of April, as a result of an attack by Ukrainian forces on the positions of the Patak battalion, 2 positions were lost due to a poor supply of ammunition. They ran out of ammunition. Lack of mortar fire cover, irresponsible actions of Patak battalion leadership, Wagner's command, upon finding out about this situation in an aggressive form and with threats of reprisals towards Patak personnel, blocked the withdrawal from the contact line and forbid rotation, and is not allowing the personnel to the safe zone. So what's happened here is these new guys showed up, and the Wagner mercenaries are telling them, you're not allowed to retreat, ever, under any circumstances. If you try and retreat, we're just going to shoot you. That's what the Wagner group has been doing for months. So these new guys are pretty shocked at how they're being treated. Not quite the cushy job with Gazprom they thought they were signing up for. And here's a video from a Wagner mercenary giving his side of the story.
Что вы можете сказать о ситуации на сегодня?
Вчера заняли лесополки с западной стороны Бахмута. Противник свои силы абсолютно не жалеет. Постоянно подтягивает новые и новые резервы по 20-30 человек в час. Работа ведется круглосуточно. Соседи, которые стояли у нас на флангах, так называемая ДРО «Поток», газпромовская ЧВК, о которой наш директор говорил, в полном составе ночью бросили свои позиции, бросили оружие и съебались оттуда просто как ссаные твари. Приходится закрывать дыры своими силами.
All of these people are so stupid and so evil. Wagner boss slams Russian government for lack of ammo. Prigozhin, the head of the Wagner mercenary group, says Russians are dying needlessly in Bakhmut because of the lack of ammunition. Oh no, I hope they don't solve the problem. Russian parliament suggests that civilians guard the borders due to lack of troops. Head of the main military political directorate of the Russian armed forces suggested that the civilian population start guarding the state borders of Russia, as the Russian armed forces currently do not have the military capacity to do this. Are you listening, China? They've got civilians guarding their borders. Russian military plane crashes in the northern region. A Russian military plane crashed in the country's Murmansk region, and it was a MiG-31 supersonic aircraft crashed in an uninhabited area during a training exercise. Both pilots safely ejected from the aircraft, according to officials. And of course, Russia never lies. There is a video of the plane crashing, and I don't see any parachutes. I don't see the occupants of the MiG-31 ever ejecting. So I'll put this link to the video down below. I can't show it on YouTube. But here's what the crash site looks like. It slammed into a frozen lake. How much does a MiG-31 cost? And that's $33 million currently sitting at the bottom of that lake. Moscow students targeted in Russia's spring military call-up. The Russian military's spring call-up has targeted Moscow students in an apparent attempt to meet Putin's target of enlisting 147,000 young men for compulsory service. So what's happening here is the rich kids of the capital city are finally being targeted for military conscription. Normally, just being a student at Moscow University would exempt you from being able to serve in the military. But because Russia is losing this war, they've now got to start conscripting the rich kids from the capital city of Moscow. And of course, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they passed that law saying, as soon as you get your conscription notice, your passport's not going to work anymore. Your driver's license is going to get turned off after 2 weeks. So once the draft notices go out, you've got 2 weeks to show up for military service. Otherwise, you are excommunicado, and none of your government services will work anymore. So what this means is that these are rich kids, and their parents can no longer pay to get them out of the country. If they were to get a conscription notice and their passport still worked, they'd be on a flight to Istanbul, to stay with someone. But they can't do that anymore. So we'll see what the attitude of Russia's upper middle class will be now that their kids are the ones having to go fight this war. Now, of course, for the right price and the right bribe, you can always get your son out of military service, but I don't know what a bribe like that goes for these days. Let's now get to some good news for Ukraine. 44 Ukrainian defenders have been exchanged in a prisoner of war swap. So these guys got to come home. And this is the image on the internet that's gone viral the last 2 days. This Ukrainian defender seeing a piece of fruit for the first time in a year. Russia treats their prisoners of war terribly. They're all tortured. In addition, they only get one meal a day, and it's a bowl of cabbage soup. So all of the returning POWs are emaciated. They've lost all their body fats. They've lost all their muscle mass. But here they are, enjoying their first piece of fruit in a year. Welcome home, heroes. Final clip I want to share with you concerns a Ukrainian defender named Vlad. And Vlad is a sapper from the 2nd Sapper Division, and he received a mine shrapnel wound while carrying out his duties last year, and unfortunately lost his eyesight. After a difficult rehabilitation, he did not lose heart, and he became a role model for many Ukrainians, creating a charity fund called Let's See Victory. So this clip is 2 American veterans visiting Ukraine. They saw him on the streets and they wanted to give him some of their military patches.
Солнце, тебе вручают морская пехота, американцы, свои шевроны. Stronger together, helping hands, healing arrows.
Healing arrows.
Thanks.
Slava Ukraine, bro. Oh, heroes. You guys are amazing. Amazing people. Thank you for doing everything, okay?
Thank you for your sacrifice.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all for this update video. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. If you found this video informative, give me a thumbs up. Best way to support the channel. Comments and questions, let me know down below. I love hearing from you guys. Till the next video, keep defending the truth, keep defending democracy.